Here.
Sinanian.
Here.
Mayor Garpetian.
Here. Maybe I have your report, please.
The agenda for the November 14, 2017 special public meeting of the City Council was posted on Thursday, November 9th, 2017 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. And what's next?
One would be Director of Community Development, Public Works, and General Manager of the Glendale Water and Power regarding City Sustainability Update Report, 1A. Motion to note and file the report.
Okay, Mr. Ochoa.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, may it please City Council. We have for you what amounts to an overview and update of a multi-pronged effort in the arena of sustainability. Now, sustainability is a big word with an even bigger meaning because of all the territory that it covers. As we get ready to kick off this presentation that will take you from the Community Development Department through our planning efforts and mobility efforts to the GWP folks giving you an update and some of the more high-profile projects that they are working on that people more readily associate with this concept of stability, or of sustainability, and then over to Public Works again to talk about some of their efforts as well in this arena. We want to highlight first and foremost of this notion of what does sustainability mean. And as you see on the screen, the things that jump out most often are the items that you see on this slide, from waste reduction, urban design, stormwater capture, meaning the runoff that goes into as part of our the storm drain system as part of our NPDES permits, facilities and water conservation, energy conservation, our fleet, pavement, transportation operations. But it even goes even further beyond this. On the next slide, you'll get an idea of what I mean. On the next slide, there you go.
Wow.
The notion of sustainability and what Glendale has done as a leader in the realm of sustainability really starts to come into focus when you consider all of the various fronts that are that have been addressed as part of the Greener Glendale program, and actually well before that. To the extent that sustainability is one of the City Council priorities that are considered and reaffirmed each year as we move through the budget process, I'm sure that you and the community have an appreciation for the work that has been done in this policy arena heretofore, but also about the work that is yet to be done as we move forward into this brave new world. So with that as a preamble, let me bring up Phil Lanzafame, and he will kick off our presentation that will make some sense of that scattered diagram that we call sustainability.
Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, I am going to kick off because it was community development working in partnership with GWP that created the Greener Glendale Plan. Sorry, I've got the Greater Downtown Strategic Plan in my mind. Greener Glendale Plan in 2010. This was a sustainability plan. And one of the things, and Scott had mentioned, when you think about sustainability, you think of those things. One of the things that we did with this plan was we actually defined it. What is it that we're after with sustainability? What does it mean? And we boiled it down to this definition that really is, it's consciously thinking about the future and how they're going to deal with whatever decisions we make today. How are we going to take care of our needs and ensure that what we do, the decisions we make, will allow for the future to have the same quality of life and not have to deal with impacts that we're leaving behind. In the Greener Glendale Plan, we looked at existing efforts. We looked at past efforts. We went back to the 30s. We looked at future programs and goals and visions that we had. We adopted, later on, we adopted the United Nations Urban Environmental Accords, which was developed in 2005. We later adopted that and used the same sustainability framework. That is, those categories and areas that we would work in: energy, waste, environmental health, urban nature, those parks and recreation. Since 2011, when we adopted those accords and created the plan, environmental justice, housing, really affordable housing or neighborhoods of affordable housing, climate adaptation and resiliency have been added to this group of 7. So everybody is working under the same framework, and they're trying to focus efforts in these areas. We want to give you some background and information on the projects that we're currently working on. From CDD's point of view, they are varied from economic development and urban design to transportation and mobility. Metro has funded the first and last mile improvements. Those are active transportation, walking, biking. We are looking at moving people more efficiently through the city, our streetcar, the Metro study that is going on right now through the San Fernando corridor, the BRT, high-speed rail. These are all fall under projects of mobility. We have going on our South Glendale Community Plan, which is an urban design. It falls in that urban design category of how do we keep sustainability in mind. What's not on here from the Community Development Department, some of our building codes, our greener building codes. Glendale actually was far in advance of the state for several years. The state has caught up, and now everybody is trying to meet that same standard. So that's a background of the Greener Glendale Plan, which kind of wraps all of our efforts together, and those highlights of sustainability from the Community Development Department. I'd like to now give it to my colleague Rubik Galanian to talk to you about Public Works.
And as Rubik comes up, I will remind council, as when you looked at the South Glendale community planning process at the beginning last July, not this past July, but the July before, one of the deliverables, if you will, that we contemplated was the amount of investment that we saw outside of the downtown and inside of the downtown, and overwhelmingly some 85 to 90% of the new housing starts and permits for those projects that were pulled in the downtown specific plan area. So to the extent that sometimes when we talk about long-term land use planning, people say, well, I can't immediately see what the impact is, the positive impact in this last wave of investment, and I'm sure in the coming wave of investment, you'll be able to see that those policy decisions that were made in 06 through 010 resulted in the construction, that concentrated development where there are amenities, where there are transportation opportunities, and thus lend to that smart growth paradigm. Similarly, with South Glendale Community Plan, you know that project, that overarching goal is that you have density in places where it makes sense, but only triggered outside of the DSP in the southern part of the city if and when certain triggers are met by way of mobility and transportation, hence the streetcar, hence the light rail along the San Fernando corridor. So yes, it does, when we talk about land use planning, feel like that you don't see those immediate results, but you do see on the horizon how this all plays, your policy choices and the actual built environment of the community. Sorry, Rubik.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. As Scott mentioned, for the last several years, the Public Works Department has been engaged in promoting many sustainable and environmentally sound initiatives throughout the years and continue to do so. And I'm just going to touch upon a few major initiatives. Stormwater capture, we a few years ago implemented the low impact development standards. We also have codified stormwater and urban runoff pollution prevention control plan. These are both for private and public land development projects that emphasize on-site retention of stormwater runoff to protect groundwater quality. And we encourage using best management practices, including biofiltration, bioretention, bioswales, and pervious pavement materials. We have also established Green Streets Manual for all of our upcoming street and roadway improvement projects. As you recall, recently we completed a Prop 84 Green Street Demonstration Project. And we actually received a note a couple of days ago that we received an award for sustainability in completing this project in Glendale. As part of that project, we installed bioswales at 3 locations, Harvard and Louis Street, and most recently at Monterey on Coronado intersection. For many years, we have also had a pavement recycling program in place. Over the last 5 years that we've kept track of our records, we have paved over 48 lane miles of streets with rubberized asphalt that uses reclaimed tire rubbers in the material. Over the last 3 years, we completed 3 cold-in-place, what's called cold-in-place recycling pavement project that uses existing old asphalt, pulverizes it, and mixes it with new asphalt that gets put back into the roadway. As such, we have saved nearly 1,700 truck trips that otherwise would have taken this material off of the site, and recycled over 21,000 tons of asphalt pavement. As recently as last year or so, we paved parking lot number 10 just west of the Central Park and Central Library with permeable pavement material that included nearly 5,500 square foot of pavement. We have a robust facilities management division at work here in the city over the consolidation of several departments that handle their facilities into one roof. And we are maintaining a sustainable program throughout many aspects of their operation. As such, nearly 100% of custodial cleaning services use green cleaning products in our facilities. 75% of our facilities have been already retrofitted with LED lighting, which has saved almost 4 million kilowatt hours in energy use annually. We have also completed several HVAC upgrades at our facilities and have significantly reduced, again, kilowatt hour consumption at our facilities. We currently in our fleet have 973 pieces of vehicles and equipment, of which we own and operate 96 CNG vehicles, 23 hybrid vehicles, and 29 full electric vehicles, and 3 propane vehicles. We are also planning in the near future to replace 85 of our fossil fuel vehicles with 50 hybrid and 35 fully electric vehicles. Councilman Devine, we are also looking into electric buses. So
well, that's funny that you mentioned that, because that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. Because in the report, I think it's page 12, you mentioned you're purchasing new vehicles, and it said they were going to be CNG, and I was going to ask, are we looking at electric? So thank you for remembering. Thank you.
Absolutely. As for waste reduction, again, last year we increased the state-mandated construction and demolition debris requirement from 50% to 65% for all the projects within the city. As a matter of fact, reportedly 40% of all waste comes from construction and demolition debris. We have a very robust recycling program throughout the city. On a frequent basis, we canvass all of our heavily used commercial areas, and recently installed 20 new recycling containers at the Montrose Shopping Park and 16 new recycling containers on Brand Boulevard. And together, these are expected to divert 1.3 tons of waste annually from our landfills. We have started multifamily buildings recycling program and already have distributed 7,200 tote bags over the summer to promote recycling. And we're expecting to add another 7,400 by the end of this month. You again recall a couple of months ago that we brought an item to you regarding commercial refuse collection franchise that, when in place, is going to help us control, have a greater control on diversion rate and recycling efforts in the city. A little bit about urban forest. We have expanded planting drought-tolerant landscaping within our parkways and street landscaping. And annually, we plant 350 indigenous trees. And Steve Zern will talk more about recycling water, but in the department, Public Works Department, over the past year, we've used over 1 million gallons of recycled water to clean our sewers, as well as nearly 600,000 gallons of recycled water to water our parkway trees.
At this point, we'd like to pivot and talk about the three projects that I think the council has heard most about in this realm of sustainability, and Rubik will cover the first one, and then Steve will do the second and third. But before we pivot off of this initial portion of the presentation, as council is very much aware, all the things that were discussed, if you go back, Rubik, a couple slides, the council members, past and present, kind of bear the scars of the policy debates on things like LID, the low impact development, and what that would mean to folks who are looking to build on their property, and the added cost potentially, the added amount of regulation that they have to comply with, or maybe it was the single-use bag ban that we put in place. That are those things that some folks would say make absolute sense that we should do, and other folks say, wait a second, that isn't necessary or necessarily the best way to move forward for any number of reasons. You see it on the next slide with respect to recycled water. Who couldn't be in favor of using more recycled water? But then when you end up in this governance realm that you all make policy in, and I'm sure Steve will talk about later on, we have to do the dance with our partners across the river in Los Angeles, because they don't want us to divert recycled water from the river, because they have plans of their own for the vision that the mayor of LA has for that river and some of the projects that they have. So the takeaway I would submit to you, as I'm sure you're well aware, is nothing is ever very easy. And as much as folks say, well, this just makes perfect sense, it doesn't necessarily always make perfect sense, because as the proverb would say, old Japanese saying, for the reverse side, there is a reverse side. And where you stand depends on where you sit. So with that, let us move towards the anaerobic digester project, and Rubik will give you a brief synopsis there.
Thank you, Mr. Ochoa. Public Works Department, jointly with Glendale Water and Power, has been working on implementing an AD facility, anaerobic digestion facility, starting 2011. And I will just touch up on some highlights of this project. So when initiated, the AD project was intended to support sustainable management of resources, as we talked about earlier. It will help the city to increase the mandated waste diversion rate. It will help us increase recovery of recyclable materials. It will help us separate nutrient-rich organic materials for highest and best use, that could be energy and compost. And finally, generate renewable power and or natural gas, which ultimately help reduce dependence on fossil fuels. In a nutshell, essentially, this is how a typical AD facility works. There is municipal waste that gets collected and then recovered and goes through a separation process and then converted into fuel that could be CNG. This diagram shows some of the principles of the anaerobic digestion system. Essentially, the biodegradable materials that will go into the collected and be delivered to the facility could be manure, food waste, wastewater solids. It could be high-strength industrial wastewater and commercial organic waste. All of this will go into the digester. Could be one or several, depending on the capacity. They will be covered airtight sealed tanks where biodegradable material is broken down by naturally occurring microorganisms. The two products that will come out of the digesters is raw biogas that could be used for generate heat and or power. It can also be processed to remove non-methane compounds and can then replace natural gas in almost any application, such as transportation or in the pipeline grid that Mr. Zinn will talk about later on. One of the byproducts, or what's called digestate, is the solid and liquid material that also be processed into many different nutrient-rich products, such as compost, fertilizer, soil amendments, or animal bedding, and there is a potential of even using it for daily cover at the landfill.
Understanding, and that's a good point to raise, is part of the discussion about anaerobic digestion. As the only conversion technology that is allowed today in the state of California, one of the few, maybe the only, in the United States, is that folks talk a lot about conversion technology and new emerging technologies for waste reduction. But pyrolysis, the superheated plasma, all these other concepts that are floating around and have been floating around for more than 25 years, certainly during my tenure in this business, none of those other things have ultimately been approved to be utilized, certainly in the state of California. This is one that is here and now, and the reason why perhaps its time has come, not just for the types of facilities you'll see in the Central Valley and agricultural lands, but even in urbanized areas like ours, is because no longer will we be able to take all of our green and tree clipping waste and use that as ADC, or alternative daily cover, that Rubik had mentioned. In the past, we used to do that. So we go and create a cell for the landfill, and then cover it over with the alternative daily cover, basically the green waste, and we're able to, one, get credit for that for waste reduction, and in doing so, we're able to be charged a different cost because it ultimately had a different function. At this point, without being able to use it for ADC any longer, we'll treat it effectively just as we would trash. And that takes the cost per ton for processing from what it was to what it ultimately will be. So the takeaway in this discussion, this policy back and forth for council is, you know that the law, the landscape is changing for organics and green waste. And so the price that you're going to be concerned with by way of looking out for your ratepayers and residents is that cost is going up. And so the question to you will be, how much will that cost go up? And that will be a function of what you end up doing with that material and where. And you will have a third layer of complexity that comes into this discussion that you've seen from folks who live near the landfill that say we don't want any, in their view, intensification of the use of the operation of that landfill, and would argue that ADC is, or that the AD, anaerobic digester, is such an intensification of that use. And so nobody wants their ox to be gored, but again, we kind of circle back to the original discussion. Everyone wants sustainability. Well, there are a number of trade-offs to be made as we move forward, and I think AD is one of those ones that will be a tremendous example for folks to really help the council prioritize those that policy agenda.
Okay, quick question on that item. In 2016, we issued an ENA for the AD.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I have one more slide if I can go over it.
Okay, go ahead.
So just a little bit about the process for the AD facility that we have implemented to date. Back in 2010, the city hired HDR Engineering to develop a waste conversion technology project. In 2011, the phase one of the implementation of the project was the verification and evaluation of qualified suppliers. In the process, we considered, as Mr. Ochoa mentioned, direct combustion, thermal gasification, plasma arc, chemical hydrolysis, thermal and catalytic depolymerization. But ultimately, the AD conversion technology deemed to be most appropriate for cities' need, including the cost of capital and operations. And this was essentially based on what we currently are producing, generating, as well as future planned collection and delivery of green and food waste. The phase 2 of the project in 2013 was the issuance of a request for the provision of a municipal solid waste AD project. And in response, the response was to develop, construct, and operate an AD facility at the Shoal Canyon landfill. We only received 3 submittals from 3 companies: Waste Resources, Organic Waste Systems, and Zero Waste Energy. But unfortunately, none of them were acceptable as a standalone proposal. So back to Mr. Mayor's point, in 2016, we entered into an exclusive negotiating agreement with a joint venture of 2 of the companies that had submitted proposals, Waste Resources and Organic Waste System. Since then, we have amended the ENA 2 times. And currently, the joint venture is in the process of performing their due diligence, including surveying, geotechnical, engineering, economic, and financial analysis.
Okay, so the ENA was extended 2 times, and they're still performing the geotechnical engineering and financial analysis. When are we going to have a report back on this thing? Because sometimes these things take so long, and then people lose interest on it. Do we get a report as to maybe every 6 months, a progress report, and see what we're, not just for this one, overall on all our ENAs?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, as a matter of fact, we have been meeting with the team on a regular basis. Our next meeting is on Friday, this coming Friday. The initial indications were that we should be able to provide a report to council by the end of this year, if not early next year.
Okay, thank you.
With that, I'll turn it over to Steve Zern.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Rubik.
Hit escape. Yeah. There you go.
Now. There we go. So just as Mr. Golani had indicated, Glendale Water and Power has a full slate of various conservation programs and projects that we've undertaken for the last several years. A lot of that focuses obviously on energy conservation and water conservation. I don't have a lot in this report for the sake of time on water conservation, because we did a lot of that this past couple of years with the water, the drought situation we're facing in California. Needless to say, as I've said before, the citizens of Glendale have done an outstanding job in their water conservation, and we're still right about that 15% below what our mark was in the 2013-2014 period of time, and it seems to have plateaued there. So again, when you go through tough times, especially when it comes to drought, and you have to implement some harsh measures. In our case, we went to phase 3 of our mandatory conservation. People begin to develop habits that are actually lifelong, and they realize that maybe they didn't need as much water in their landscaping, and they're able to do things within their home to conserve water. So I'm proud to say that we have continued to keep our water usage down. For the purpose of this report, we're going to talk about our renewable portfolio. This is the RPS. This is what's tied to the state mandate, SB 350, which is the current law of the land, and it requires us to have a renewable portfolio of 50% by the year 2030. We'll also do just a review of Grayson. That had been a question that had come up, just taking a look at where it is today and how it fits into our overall integrated plan. We'll talk about the solar and EV programs we have going. I know Councilmember Devine had asked us about that in the past. And then obviously open it up to any questions you may have. So the regulatory framework for what sets our renewable portfolio standard is outlined here, essentially. The first legislation that went into place was SB 107, and that required us to have the 20% renewable in place by 2010. Coming back with SB 350 that has us at 33% in 2020 and 50%, as I mentioned, in 2030. And it all really is tied to the greenhouse gas reduction bill, which was SB 32. And so as in our IRP that we developed, our integrated resource plan, we have that SB 350 number in there, and that was the mark that we had used to formulate our plan for the future. I have down there the proposed Senate Bill SB 100. That was what it was this past session. As you may recall, it got held up in committee as it was going down to the end of the session, and it stayed there. It did not move. There's a lot of questions. I fully expect it to be back next year, but there's a lot of debate and a lot of questions about what will happen with that. There's a lot more folks that are questioning it, including labor, the legislature. There's a lot of turnover in Sacramento. Some of the folks that have been spearheading this for a long, long time are moving on to different objectives in their political careers. Senator De Leon is running for U.S. Senator, and he was the main author of this, so he will give up his leadership position and obviously be spending a lot of his time working to get into Washington. So we will see. I can talk a lot about that. I can talk a whole session about this, but what I will do is come back to you because we've begun the discussions amongst the utilities on SB 100 and what will come up next year already. So I will come back in a form of a legislative update and talk to you a little bit more about that. Obviously, if you have any questions, I can answer those as well. For the city of Glendale, we have a mix of long-term contracts and short-term purchases that meet our load, our renewable load, along with our non-renewable load. Portfolio of direct power purchase agreements and contracts through SCAPA. That's the Southern California Public Power Authority. That's a joint action agency that we belong to, along with all of the other publicly owned utilities in Southern California. It's an organization that allows us to realize economies of scale when we go out for these large power purchase agreements. At the moment, Glendale is exceeding California average renewable and carbon-free energy use. Here is what our breakdown is over the last 3 years. These are year-end numbers that we reported to the CEC. So landfill gas, and this is burned at Grayson, is 5.6%, 4.6%, 4.5%. That number fluctuates primarily because we only have 2 pieces of equipment that burn that gas, and those 2 pieces of equipment aren't always up and operational. So that'll dictate how much of that gas we use. And then you just see our long-term contracts for both renewable and carbon-free, and we have increased our long-term contracts in 2016 on renewable. That's primarily the Schuyler agreement that we came back with to you just recently and increased that, both our renewable and carbon-free. And then we have our spot market purchases for both renewable and carbon-free. You can see we've had a lot of activity in the spot market on the renewable, but you can also see that has gone down each of the years. As we get closer to some of these statewide goals, you're going to see spot market purchases are going to be less and less available and more expensive as people rally to try to get their numbers. We're fortunate. There's a lot of publicly owned utilities that have heavy coal portfolios, and so they need to do a lot of maneuvering in order to meet some of these mandates. And then our carbon-free spot market purchases are obviously just very minor in the overall scope. But when you add the renewable and carbon-free, you can see over the last 3 years we've been very successful in our energy portfolio. When you look at it in comparison to the state of California in 2016, you see that we had a 47% renewable energy. Primarily, those were spot market purchases. And then you can see that's the graph on the left, or the bar chart on the left, and on the right is what the average in the state of California was for that same period of time. So you can see we're far exceeding what the other publicly owned utilities, actually all utilities, investor-owned as well, have to comply with the law in the state. And then the color differences are just the types of energy that we have in our portfolio. So you see up there wind and solar, small or eligible hydroelectric. There's a difference in the state. Large hydro is not something you can claim as your RPS. Then you have geothermal and biomass or biogas, which for us is the Shoal Canyon gas.
Which color is that on the? I
The
can't.
biogas
see.
is the light blue.
The biogas.
So yeah, so going from top to bottom on that bar, you'd have wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, and biogas.
Thank you. And this is what we're using? This is
what we used in 2016. So that was for our total year.
So we used almost half renewables.
Correct.
and
Or carbon, or half
Or-
renewables in this.
Okay.
On this chart, yes, that is true.
And on statewide, it was only 25.
25% for the rest.
That's pretty significant, isn't it?
I think so. This is mine. And then this is when you add in the carbon-free. And for us, the difference there is we have two very large long-term contracts that are carbon-free. That's Hoover Dam and Palo Verde. Now, as I said, large hydro and nuclear are not renewable portfolio eligible, but they are certainly carbon-free. Now, you can argue they have a whole list of their own social and political stigmas unto themselves, but at the end of the day, they are carbon-free. They are in our portfolio. They're very, very cost-effective.
Why aren't they being considered as renewable?
I'm sorry.
Why aren't they being considered as renewable?
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, certainly nuclear has never had any traction in Sacramento to get that distinction. So it will remain carbon-free. There's been tremendous debate about large hydro. When the first law went into effect, there was an argument of wanting to grandfather in the large hydro, and the comment was, if we do that, we're just going to add on to what your responsibility will be. In other words, what your mandate will be. Instead of 33%, we'll make it 40%. Probably should have just said yes at that point in time, knowing that it was going to go up after that. So the idea was they kept large hydro out of it, and there are certain eligible hydro projects, which we have a small one in the Pacific Northwest called Tieton. And if you can get in those smaller projects, which is, I believe, under 100 megawatts, then you can claim it as RPS. Anything over that, large dam projects, they aren't eligible.
Largely, it's the environmental impact that you would ascribe to damming a large river, and not really counting that in the same way towards your environmental goals, because arguably that has an adverse impact, or you could argue that it would have an adverse impact on the natural environment. Hence the debate that Steve's talking about.
So part of it is to thwart development of any future projects of that type, but at the same time, those that are already in place, arguably they could as well have impacts on the environment, but we aren't able to count those as renewable.
Okay.
Again, this just goes over a couple of the key renewable projects that we've worked on. As I mentioned, the Skylar project, which we brought to you, it's 55% renewable and 20% carbon-free. We upped that from a 50% to 75%. Our renewable energy delivery is increased by 5%. Good contract, good cost-effective contract, probably the best we have in our portfolio. And we will be able to continue to reap the benefits of that for the next 21 years. And then, of course, is one of the two projects Mr. Ochoa alluded to is the biogas project at Shoal Canyon. So currently we have a project that captures the gas, treats it, and sends it to the current Grayson power plant where it's blended with natural gas and burned in the existing units. Very inefficient and ineffective way of handling that. We get half the credit for the biogas because we blend it, and we have to blend it because of such poor quality. So the project in Shoal will put the actual specialized generating units right there in place of where the current system is, and we will burn the energy right there and put it into the grid. That'll be a 100% renewable project. It'll be about 12 megawatts here. And as you go, if you can remember back to that chart I had where it was 4 to 5% of our renewable portfolio was biogas, it now is going to jump up to 9%. That's just the doubling of the claim that we'll be able to use the 100% of the credit for the gas. and you have a higher availability versus current because we split the projects. So today, if one of those 2 units at Grayson goes down, we have to flare because we can no longer use the gas. In this case, if something happens at Grayson, it's separate and distinct from what's up at Shoal, and we can continue to use that gas, burn it, and not have to flare it, which is a less effective way of dealing with the biogas, and consequently, it's the greenhouse gas that you're really concerned about, because methane is one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas.
And that methane will be coming out of that landfill for some time still.
Well, I would say for at least 25 to 30 years, if not longer. And that would be from the end of disposal. And I use the golf course, if you're all familiar with the golf course. That closed in 1975. It still produces gas today. So it will continue to cook, as they say, the organics that are in the facility, and it's a slow process, and it will continue to create the gas. It'll have it will begin to degrade and level off, and then begin to drop, but it'll still be produced. There's no question. And more importantly, from an environmental standard and environmental stewardship, it has to be dealt with. You have to treat it. In this particular case, we're treating it by turning it into electricity. Again, some of the things I just said, landfill gas continually produced. We will get all 12 megawatt credit in our RPS. We have existing infrastructure in place to handle the connection to the grid. We eliminate the 5 mile long pipeline that we currently have that goes from the landfill to Grayson. And then the generators are designed, as I said, specially to burn landfill gas, so you don't have the degradation of the main equipment that you do today. And we expect to see a more efficient production. And again, as I said, we decouple the two, biogas and the main power island equipment, and that way they aren't both affected when one has a problem.
So just a quick question, Steve.
Yes, sir.
With regard to the methane that's produced, flaring is a more environmentally friendly alternative than just letting the methane gas escape on its own.
That is correct, sir. In fact, by law, we wouldn't allow it. We could not allow it to escape by itself. We would have to, at a minimum, flare it.
Because methane itself is one of the most harmful greenhouse gases.
That is correct.
I don't know what the byproducts of flaring it are, some carbon.
You do get some carbon, there's no question.
But it's still better than just letting the gas seep out.
To eliminate the greenhouse gas is preferable. Obviously, you want to try to strive to eliminate all emissions if you can over a period of time. But again, some of that isn't feasible. So you get to a point where you reduce it to the point that is best for the environment. In this case, yes, you're right, Mr. Madron. Thank you. And then as we go forward, we continue. This is an ongoing issue. We obviously have a goal under SB 350 to get to 50% by 2030, so we are actively engaged in looking at new renewable projects and resources. We do a lot of that through SCAPA. That's just a great organization. They have staff that's dedicated to that. They find the projects. We get an opportunity to sit in on the early stages of it, see if it's right for us, and then hopefully we can find something to develop that fits our needs and come back to you with a project, and we'll continue to do that. Local development as well, so that to the extent that we can use Shoal Canyon as the biogas project and any other local development. We're a little bit hamstrung because a lot of these projects take land, and a lot of land, and we just don't have that available land in Glendale. But to the point that we can at least try to use what we have to augment our portfolio, we certainly are looking at that as well. And again, all the way down, we go, going to industry conferences, talking to energy suppliers. Schuyler is a firm that we continue to engage in opportunities, including local development here in Glendale. And then continue to upgrade our IRP and make sure that we're adjusting our system model to meet RPS requirements and making sure that we are continuing to move forward with regards to the use of renewables and meeting the mandates and improving our production. Grayson Power Plant, just a little bit. We've talked a lot about Grayson over the last 2.5 years, but there were some questions primarily about costs and expenditures of the facility as it is today. Grayson has a very high average cost to generate relative to other resources, and you've heard me say that before. It's one of the most expensive. So here's an example. It's $40 a megawatt, and we just put up there, MPP is Magnolia and Burbank, of which the city of Glendale has a part of. That's a 310 megawatt facility that was built in 2005. It's a gas facility, so you can see it's operating at $25 a megawatt. IPP is an old coal plant in Utah. We still have a piece of that. But you can see where that is at $20 a megawatt. And then
They're
Hoover,
repowering that, aren't they?
They are, yes,
They're
sir.
turning that to a
Yes, sir.
natural.
2025 is when that contract ends, and they have to have it repowered by then. Or let me put it this way: if they don't repower it by then, the 6 California cities will be out of that agreement, and the 6 California cities constitute about 86% of the ownership. So I'm pretty sure they're going to repower it. And then Hoover, which is a non-fuel, carbon-free, and you can see that's one of the lowest in our portfolio. But that's just to give you kind of a perspective. What does that mean? $40 doesn't seem a lot. $15 difference in MPP. So let's just imagine, and just to get an idea, I'm estimating that a repowered Grayson is going to be in the neighborhood of $20, $21, $22 a megawatt. So half of what it is today. So how does that translate? Let's say we produce 600,000 megawatts at the power plant. That's about 50% of what our total retail sales a year are. We sell about 1.1 million megawatts. So let's say we produced half. I'm just throwing that out there, but just as an example. We produce 600,000 megawatts. At $40 a megawatt versus $20, $21, $22 a megawatt, you're saving $10 to $12 million a year. So it's a considerable amount of money. When you look at it, in a comparison to MPP, for instance, it's $15. But the $15 over 650,000, or let's say 500 to 600,000 megawatts, and I can tell you there's a good chance you can produce more than that. You save a considerable amount of money. That's like $350 million over 30 years. So that alone gives you an idea of the inefficiency of the plant today versus new technology. And again, we all know, you've heard me say it many times, you see my reports when the weather gets warm, unpredictable and unsteady capital expenditures. We've had $12 million swings, and nothing that we have done at Grayson in the last 5 years has been something we plan to do. It hasn't been, we've had a couple of overhauls that are part of our O&M, but when you talk about major capital, these have all been reactive, emergency-type repairs that we've had to make, not something we had in a 5-year capital plan. It's been very, very reactive. Here's just a few. The Unit 4 boiler tube, that was a $4 million project. That lasted less than 2 weeks before another part in the generator went out. Unit 8 control system replacement. Unit 3 boiler plug repairs. Unit 3 is out. Unit 3 will not be brought back. It's just too cost prohibitive to bring it back online. Currently, we continue to have problems with the control system on 8 as we deal with that. Here's the capital expenditures for Grayson from 2007 to the present. And let me point out that where it bottoms out in 2012, 2013, that's when the utility was facing some pretty severe financial crisis, as you recall, and we just stopped investing any more money into water, electric, or the power plant until we were able to step back and evaluate where we were at and begin to get our feet back on the ground, or get our feet back under us financially. So we discontinued any major capital projects. And then you can see as it begins to ramp up and how much we spent in 2015. And although it came down in 2016, you can see it came down. It's still much higher than it had been ever before. And these are, honestly, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the best way I can describe these are Band-Aid repairs. You invest a lot of money in old equipment, hope it holds. But I can tell you that year after year, especially in the third quarter, the hot season, it's always quite an effort by the staff, both in our power supply and our power plant management to keep things running.
And Mr. Zerner,
Yes, ma'am.
if I might add that at the SCAG meeting, Energy and Environment Committee that I'm on, we had a pretty comprehensive report on climate change and how we are going to get hotter and hotter, and it's going to take more and more energy to run our air conditioning. And of course, we're going to be drier and drier as well. So that is a sure bet for the future.
Yes, ma'am. There's no question. And as you know, we broke our records this past year as far as maximum megawatts during the hot part. That Labor Day weekend, we hit the record one day and broke it the next day. And again, we had what's become our usual late October heat wave. And that was a really touch and go for us to get through that. I honestly thought we were going to have to go to rolling blackouts on that second day, because that was a situation where the temperature never got below 80 degrees at that night. So at 3 and 4 in the morning, it was still 80, 82 degrees, and people were still running their air conditioners for the comforts. But that puts a tremendous burden on the system, and that's the next day when you begin to see things unravel. Again, financial impacts, I've gone over most of these. It's the capital investment. You see up there fewer megawatts per unit of fuel purchase because of the heat rate, because of the inefficiencies. So you're burning more gas to produce the megawatts you need, when in fact a much more efficient unit would use less gas, in some cases maybe as much as half the gas that you're using now. And that last bullet there is something that especially as we move towards a greater renewable portfolio, is the ability to use Grayson to firm and shape the intermittent power that is wind and solar primarily. That's power that is not steady, and you can't put it in the system if it's not steady. So, it isn't consistent, so it has to be firmed and shaped. And at this point in time, that is done with a gas plant, and we pay others to do that for us because we don't have the capability to do it, and we pay a premium to have that done. So the ability for us to be able to do it locally is also going to save costs there. Not to mention that, we pay the city of Los Angeles upwards of $5 million a year for spinning reserve. Spinning reserve is nothing more than an insurance policy that we have to have in place in order to be able to trade and in order to be able to meet our regulations. For the last 3 years, we've spent probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.5 million a year during Q3 buying power to get through the heat. And we've been fortunate. Q3, traditionally at LADWP, has been a quarter when they have a no-sale policy. But they've been willing to sell to us. But as you can see, it's extremely expensive to buy it through 1 quarter. And that's just to help augment what we have in the rest of our portfolio.
So one quick question. With
Yes,
the Grayson Repower, that $5 million is going to go away?
Correct.
So you're not going to spend that with the city of LA?
We would be able to provide our own spinning reserve, and we would not need to have that contingency cost or that service provided by LA. Not to mention, we would not have to buy those Q3, make those Q3 purchases that we had in the past. And when we bring the more detailed financial analysis, Mr. Mayor, we will lay those costs out for what it is we're paying other entities today versus what we would be able to accomplish on our own with a repowered Grayson, and you'll see that comparison. There's quite a few of those kind of costs that go into it, not to mention the big one, which is where you just, you can drop the cost of production virtually in half.
Okay, let's continue, please.
And then reliability, and we've talked about it. It's our own reliability, our need to make sure that we keep the lights on. It's the reliability that we're required through our balancing authority agreement with Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, through the federal and state regulators. And so the reliability issue becomes very, very important, extremely important. I think a lot more important than people realize. It's not just a matter of wanting to be able to say, we're reliable. We had, just a few outages and short durations. There are other entities that insist that we have to have a certain level of reliability, or we can't further exist as a utility. So we need to make sure that when we're talking about NERC and our obligation to LA under our balancing authority agreement, that we're meeting those demands. And Grayson, again, is part of the integrated plan. It's not the only plan. I know a lot of folks want to say that we're building a plant so that this is going to be the single, one and only source of energy in the city, and that's just not true. It's part of an integrated plan. It is, as you see there, we've talked about a repowered plant being able to allow us to free up transmission to bring in more renewable. But again, it's integrated into the overall plan, a solid mix that gets us cost-effective power, that gets us reliable power, that gets us to a point where we can meet the state mandates and do what we think is good for the environment as well. And I've gone through most of these already. I won't belabor those. Solar program in Glendale. So including the GWP-owned system that we have at Glendale Community College, the City of Glendale has installed, since we started this program, 1,344 systems for a total of 12,220 kilowatts. The gallery's in the process of putting a rather large system in for themselves. It's about 1,000, so that could be easily by the end of this year, over 1,300 kilowatts of rooftop solar. Our incentive program, 2002 is when we started. We became one of the first municipal utilities to provide solar rebates. Since that time, we've issued over $13 million, close to $14 million in solar incentives, and that has funded or helped fund 892 systems throughout the city. And we have currently, in 17-18, $1 million in our solar incentive program for even further development. And that's something we budget every year. And we come to you and set a 2-year budget as part of our overall conservation program. And as you may recall, or some of you may recall, we've upped that at least twice in the past.
Is that program open now? Are you taking?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Devine, it opened and it closed. Oh. This is one of the most popular programs. It's usually over about an hour after it starts. So if we open application process, because we take them online, we open that application process around 9 a.m. in the morning, and it's pretty much closed in an hour or two. We've gone to a lottery system to try to bring some equity into it. So this past year we did a lottery for that, because we always have more demand than we have incentive money available. So it's an extremely
So for 17, 18?
17, 18 is $1 million we have.
When is that going to be?
It's already closed.
Oh, it's gone.
Yes.
Okay, it's gone. Okay.
It's over for...
Councilman Alexanian. Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
So we want to spend $350 million or $500 million in, exchanging or replacing what we have in Grayson. And renewable energy and solar system. As you mentioned, people that come forward, they want to put these panels on their roof, and we say you go through lottery system, and then we are not providing them incentive to do it. So why we are doing that? Why, if they want to put solar system or solar panels on their roof, why we don't encourage them rather than to go through this lottery system? What's the reason?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Agajanian, there's more demand than there is money to provide, so we make it a fair and equitable process. The money that's used for this comes from a very specific program, state-mandated program, public benefit charge. Now, you as a council pass that public benefit charge budget every 2 years. If you want to increase that amount, now, of course, I have a finite amount of money within that budget, but you can increase it up to more than $1 million if you so desire. And when I bring that to you, we can talk about that. You cannot use ratepayer money to subsidize a home solar program. That's against the law. So there's different laws that require what you can and can't do with ratepayer money. But the public benefit charge money, which is on your bill, you actually do pay that. But that's a special program funded by developed by the state. City of Glendale has actually one of the highest percentages of public benefit charge. Then that money can be used for very specific purposes. We use most of ours for rooftop solar incentives. We also use it for low-income and senior rate subsidies. So it is eligible for that too. Those are our two biggest expenditures. This next year, I'm going to propose that we increase the rate subsidy for seniors and low income. But we can also talk about increasing the solar incentive.
I mean, just again, I want to touch this issue because we're going to spend lots of money on Grayson.
Correct.
If we encourage the public to put solar panels on their roof, so you're not going to need whatever amount of electricity you will generate in Grayson. You will reduce the amount of usage or what you want to have. I know still we have to work on Grayson. We need the money. But if we encourage them, so amount of electricity you have to generate in Grayson will be reduced. Isn't that true?
Mr. Agajanian, it would be reduced, but it is so small, it is not utility scale. So let's say we took, for instance, Google Earth every roof in the city. And assuming every roof could take rooftop solar, or every owner of the roof wanted rooftop solar, there isn't enough rooftops in Glendale to meet the demand that we would have for those rooftops. And the cost would be exorbitant. We used today's figures and thought it would probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.2 billion to buy the equipment. And it wouldn't generate enough electricity to even meet the demand of what Grayson is today.
I'm not expecting to, replace the rooftop with Grayson. I mean, the electricity we will generate is not going to replace Grayson, but will reduce the amount of money you want to spend. And people, they are willing to pay on their own. We are just giving them the incentive. The rest of it, they will bear the expenses.
And nobody's stopping anybody from putting it on their roof now. Anybody can put it on.
Because it's not worth it. Because right now, to put solar panel, if you do not get incentive from the city, the amount of money that they have to invest is not worth it. I mean, you have to invest money on your solar system, and after a while, you have to have benefit of that investment. So if we don't help them, they are not going to do it. So I don't see the reason that we are doing this lottery system. People, they come forward, and we are telling them, oh, we don't have the capacity to do it. We have to provide them with the incentive. We have to help them to do that. And what we're going to spend on Grayson will be reduced. Doesn't matter how much we're going to reduce it, but it will be reduced. Here we have Galleria, as you mentioned. This is a big facility, right? They came to the conclusion that for the clean energy or the amount of money they will invest, at the end, they will benefit from their investment. So we have to encourage them. I don't want to give a direction now, but I'm saying we should not have a lottery system. We should have enough money to whoever comes forward to help them to put this solar panels.
And so
that's my opinion.
When I bring forward to you the budget for the next budget, which will be, this is the second year of a 2-year budget, I will have that available for us to talk about, and I'll show you what the limitations we have for the amount in the budget, and how much you want to put in each program, whether that's rate subsidy, whether it's solar incentive, whether it's programs like the thermostats and those kind of things. And then that's council's decision to...
So the number can be adjusted to increase the...
Absolutely, sir.
Understanding that you wouldn't be using necessarily other ratepayer money to subsidize another ratepayer, but if you wanted to take, say, general fund money from the general fund and put that for the public benefit of increasing, to some degree, solar, then you could. Then the question for you becomes, well, that money in the general fund, what does it go towards? And what do you not do in the general fund because you want to incentivize solar installations on, say, residential properties? Then you ask yourself, okay, do we incentivize all residential properties? If it's a $2 million house, do we incentivize that, or should they be expected to do it themselves? And you start to get into the fine points of those details, but that ultimately is a council decision.
Councilmember,
Thank you.
Zinani.
So the repowered Grayson version 2, how much electricity is it supposed to produce in kilowattage?
It'll be 250 megawatt facility.
250 megawatt. So I'm looking at, so Galleria is going to create 1,000
Kilowatts.
And what you're saying is that in order for 250 megawatts of electricity to be replaced with solar electricity, it's going to take something like $2 billion.
And yes, Mr. Sinanian, and yet there's still not enough roofs to get all the way to 250.
And you don't even have the physical sort of space to
Correct.
create that kind of electricity. Okay.
Correct. It is a good program. It is good to help. It is good as part of an integrated plan that includes as many different aspects. But in and of itself, it cannot replace grid scale electrical production. And just as just some additional thought, average solar installation on a residential unit, based on the costs that we're seeing today, and we get all those costs obviously that come through for us, is 6 kilowatt system. So that's about the average size house. It's about $30,000 to $35,000 for the system. And based on this, as I have this slide up, you see what our incentive is $1.11 per watt. That's about $6,600 incentive for $30,000 to $35,000 system. We found a lot of people that are putting it on that aren't using the incentive because they just want to do it. But I think the bottom line is when you look at a household income, that's a pretty expensive investment. Even with the incentive, you're still talking about over $25,000. So to the extent that, again, in the budget, when we bring it to you, I can show you, as Mr. Ochoa said, if you want to go outside into other sources of funding, but I can show you what the public benefit charge fund balance is, and you can budget that money within the parameters of the PBC regulations any way you like.
Yeah, well,
Sir. Okay, I'm going to go to Mr.
I know this is an overview.
Yes, sir.
But, I have a problem with that because taking the public benefit charge money and giving it to relatively wealthy homeowners to put solar on their homes, I think really screws the apartment owners who are paying into that fund. I'm not owners, the renters of this city, which outnumber the owners. I see that as a reverse Robin Hood taking place. So, our goals for self-sufficiency on solar are great. I think that's part of our sustainability plan. I think that's excellent. But I really have a problem in using all of that public benefit money to subsidize rich homeowners who want to put solar on their roof so their electric bill is cheaper. I can't do that to the renters. I have a lot of friends that are renters. I used to be a renter, and I'd be awfully ticked off if I saw that happening. But
Mr. Najarian, which is one of the reasons we always look at it kind
stand
of
up for my
internally
people. They elected me to stand up for them.
as a balance for solar incentives versus rate incentives for those folks who don't have that ability, so that we try to balance those funds. But again, that's totally your call. And we are, Mr. Najarian, looking at the possibility of something called community solar, which is where if we can get solar in an area where multifamily dwellings could benefit from it, but you got to have a lot of cooperation from the owners of the building, and we haven't seen that.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Mr. Agajanian because I have speakers cards and I have a closed session after that, so I want to move this thing along, please.
The property owners are resident of this city, and we can create a situation that even the homeowners, apartment owners also to be able to put solar system. There's no problem.
No, they can do it.
They can put
Yes.
also. And the third thing I want to say, if a system is so popular that you open an hour and then you have to close it because there are so application to deal with, I think we have to help them. I don't see any reason not to help them from general fund or wherever, and put less pressure on Grayson.
So this will come back as part of the budget process in the spring, because that's normally when we bring it. But I'll make a separate presentation where we can talk about all of the different things, and then I'll work with the finance department on potential general fund contributions. Mr. Mayor, if I could, because I know Ms. Devine had asked me, I'm going to jump to something here, and just our EV charging stations. And just a quick note on our EVs. We are based on the data we get from the state. When it's where vehicles are registered, Glendale's electric vehicle population, if you will, is going up. And then I think this is kind of, and council has approved $300,000 at this time to put in charging stations, and we're looking to put those in as many places as we can. And we've got at least 5 right now that we're working on. It's not as easy as it would seem. We have to follow all the building codes, ADA codes, and all of those type of things. But I think here's an idea that Mrs. Devine had brought to me, and something we're looking at, which is the pole-mounted one, that first picture, the upper picture, where you mount it on a current utility pole, and you get street-level charging capability there. The city of Los Angeles has done this. We have 2 of these on the way that we're going to set up. The other is just a pedestal-mounted street EV charging station. Goes in a parking area. We got to kind of deal with that.
Are these free?
No, these would be charge card slides. Yes. So I just wanted to cover that, so we have that. I can talk at another time more about that, because I know you're raring to go. Any questions for me?
I have a question.
Mr. Najarian.
You know, something you didn't talk about, Mr. Zern, is the use of batteries.
Yes.
And I know we have something at the Grandview Station. And a lot of people talk about battery power as being a great thing, but I'm concerned about the lithium-ion battery. It seems like it's transporting our environmental issues to other places in the world. Australia, South America. There's something called the lithium triangle of Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia, where 80 to 90% of the lithium is produced. It's very dangerous to the environment. It takes a toll on human lives and on the environment. It hurts the indigenous people in South America. It has contaminated their water, their limited water supply. There are instances of slave labor, child labor being used to extricate. And if I'm wrong, and people let me know. I mean, this is research. In fact, the EPA said that lithium batteries are a serious problem for our environment. It has shrunk lakes and lagoons, genetic deformities and respiratory issues have been reported by the miners of this. So, I mean, I don't know. And the way they mine it is they use toxic chemicals to separate the lithium from the ore, from the lithium ore. So, I mean, we were out there when you did Grandview, and we were so happy we've got these batteries, but it comes at an environmental cost. And this is what this report is about: sustainability, not just for the city of Glendale. We've been talking about global warming. Obviously a problem that all of us face that live on planet Earth. I think we should also be concerned about the contamination and the serious adverse effects of the lithium ion. And it might save us here in town. We can put our solar batteries on, our solar panels on, and when the sun goes down, we just use these lithium ion batteries. But we're transporting, death and mayhem and encouraging this industry. So unless we do something about it, I mean, I'd like to see some report on that. I know part of our plan, I'm not going to mention Grayson because I am conflicted on that, but in other areas of our substations where we're going to use some batteries like that, I mean, let's not close our eyes and say, look how green we are when we plug in a lithium-ion battery, because it's a dangerous product that we need to address.
And I think, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Najarian, again, you will hear naysayers bring up the worldwide impacts, and so that certainly is. But I can even boil that down into the local impacts is photovoltaic cells and batteries have a defined life. So what happens when they're done? Where do we put them? Obviously, we'll put them in a disposal facility. But where?
Or recycle them, try to recycle them, and there's environmental effects associated with that. So
right. Never a perfect world, always things to think about. But with that,
thank you, Mr. Zern.
You got it.
I'm going to go to the speakers now. First speaker is Scott Lowe. Followed by Dan Brotman.
That's me. Thank you. And one thing is solar panels are actually made of mostly of silicone, so there's actually a robust secondary market for silicone from used solar panels. Thank you for having me. First, most of the sustainability report is great, and I want to thank the council and staff for their efforts, but I'm here to challenge the inclusion of the Grayson Repower as part of GWP's sustainability report. The Grayson expansion proposal is non-sustainable both financially and in its local and global environmental impacts. On a local level, currently, as you saw, the Grayson plant runs rarely and produces a small percentage of Glendale's power. GWP's proposal will allow running of the expanded power plant much more often than it is now, increasing emissions of criteria pollutants linked to cancer and asthma risk. Worse, the expanded plant would be permitted to run and pollute nearly around the clock in one of the densest parts of Glendale. The Disney Creative Complex is right there, DreamWorks is right there, and most of Northwest Glendale is nearby. It makes no sense to insource pollution back into Glendale where it will harm residents' health. That's the entire core of the proposal, is that it lets us burn more natural gas in Glendale and pollute more in Glendale. That makes no sense to me. On a global level, according to the draft EIR, the expanded plant will increase greenhouse gas emissions from the plant's current actual emissions of 60,000 tons per year to 476,000 tons per year. So that's 60,000 tons per year to 476,000 tons per year. That's the greenhouse gas equivalent of adding 91,000 cars to Glendale's roads. We know global temperature is rising, so increasing our greenhouse emissions by a factor of 6 doesn't seem very sustainable to me. On a financial level, the plant will cost at least $500 million, a figure so high that GWP recently removed all mention of cost from the Grayson Repower website until the fact that they were hiding that cost was brought to the attention of the GWP Commission. Is the Grayson expansion a wise long-term investment of Glendale's resources at a time when our relationship to fossil fuels is so profoundly changing? From 2010 to 2016, prices for solar have decreased by nearly 73%. Battery storage is getting cheaper every year, although it does have issues. California already has a 50% renewable mandate, and SB 100 is a very strong reality. Those mandates aren't going to go away. If we dump $500 million into Grayson now, that doesn't solve our energy problem. It just kicks the can down the road for a few years, then we'll still need to buy whatever the next carbon-free technologies are once the state has mandated fossil fuel power plants must close. Rather than investing $500 million in a plant using 1960s technology, I asked the Glendale City Council to take the initiative, show commitment to sustainability and environmental leadership, and commission an independent study by a group like NREL or E3 that is better equipped to evaluate forward-thinking solutions to our energy needs than the fossil fuel industry consultants who drafted the current Grayson plant. If we don't actively look for those solutions, we'll never find them. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan Brockman. Followed by Karen Kwok.
Yeah, I might need a couple more minutes. Can Karen yield her time? It won't be 10 minutes, but I may need...
No, you have, if she yields her time, you have 5 minutes.
If she yields my time, okay. All right. She'll yield.
I yield my time.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Okay. I mean, it's an important topic. It's not like building a speed bump on my road, so I think having only 5 minutes is difficult. But you know, look, I'm encouraged that you're talking about sustainability today. This is great, and I applaud the council for doing this. We're all in the same boat here. We all ultimately want the same thing for our kids. You know, it's just about how we get there. So I don't want to be here sounding like I'm always complaining, I'm always criticizing. You know, I just am very concerned, and I want to bring those concerns to the forefront. Okay, so please, excuse the fact that you're hearing so much of me. So the Greener Glendale plan, I read through it. It's a great, it obviously took a lot of effort when it was put together in 2012. But, I mean, to be honest, it wasn't a huge stretch. We didn't really go out on a limb as far as our commitment to reduce greenhouse gases. What we said in the plan was that we would reduce by 8% over our baseline of 2004, I think it was, by 2020. By the time we came out with a plan, we had already reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 7%. because between 2004 and 2009, we had already had a 7% reduction. So if I'm not mistaken, I think we were really only signing up for another 1% reduction. So, okay, that was 5 years ago. A lot has changed. We have a much better understanding of the pace and the consequences of climate change than we did then. We also have a much, we know that the solutions are at hand now in a way we didn't 5 years ago. So I think it's time now to get really, really serious about this. It's been 5 years. So the plan called for measurements to be made after 5 years to see how we're doing. So my first question is, it's been more than 5 years. Are we doing another inventory? Are we doing another measurement to see where we stand today? I don't know, but we should. My next question is, are we redoing the plan and are we setting new goals, which I think we absolutely need to. I'm hoping we put together a real climate action plan. If you're not familiar with the one that Pasadena did, or they're still working on it, it's really very good. And I've spoken to their consultants. It's been a while, but it's a very good plan. You should look at it and see what they've done. They have very specific actions, each action tied to a carbon reduction, and they're committing to these, and they're committing to an overall reduction of 50% by I think it's by 2030, which is I think what we're going to have to do because the state now under SB 32 is calling for a 40% reduction from 1990 levels by 2030. So for us, that's equivalent to about 50, maybe even more than 50%. So we're going to have to, get very serious about this. Let's see. At the time, at 2004, when we did our first plan, our baseline emissions were 1.735 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents. So, we would need to cut to about 870,000 tons. It's a big cut, right? I think we can do it, but it's going to take a lot of commitment. Now, just close with a few points. I think I have time. We're not going to be able to get these greenhouse gas reductions that we're going to need to meet SB 32 goals if we repower Grayson. The repowering itself, as the last speaker just mentioned, would add a net 415,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year. That's an addition of 415 when we're trying to go down to 870,000. I mean, it just doesn't square. So we can't do the repowering. At the time that the Greener Glendale plan was released, one of the council members, doesn't matter who, said Glendale is a leader in green initiatives and sustainability, not only locally, but regionally. I would really like that to be true. We can make it true. I don't think it's true today. Finally, I would recommend setting up a citizens advisory board to participate in a new Greener Glendale plan or a new sustainability plan or a new, what do they call it? Carbon, I forget what it's, anyway, a carbon reduction plan. And I would volunteer to be on that board. I think there's some great people around Glendale. I would also suggest maybe reaching out to the AESA. They have some fantastic people that could provide a lot of kind of community input, but with a very technical experience and could help make that plan even better. I think that'll be it. Thank you.
If I can ask a question. Dan, can I ask a question? Welcome back. Can you address this lithium issue?
I can't, but what I'll tell you is at next week's council meeting I will. Okay. I'll speak about it, okay?
Okay. I have a question for staff, Mr. Mayor, if I may. Question for staff, Dan. Thank you. So the net increase of 415
is for staff.
metric tons of CO2. Can you address
Before
that?
Mr. Zern does, let me defer to City Attorney if it's okay, with the council. Because we have received all of these comments vis-a-vis the EIR comment process, and that process needs to be protected. I don't know how much we can get into here. Certainly we appreciate all of the comments. We will answer them in earnest, but it has to be at this point because the EIR comment period is underway until, I believe, the 20th.
Till next Monday, it's still open.
Okay.
We need to treat that gingerly.
Okay, I appreciate that, but this is a sustainability update report.
And so with respect to Grayson Repower, I would make those comments, but again, I would defer, City Attorney, how much detail can we go into? Because the comments were made specifically in regards to the EIR for Grayson Power Plant.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, the comment period is open. There is a significant amount of information available to the public vis-a-vis the EIR and FAQs that are made available for purposes of clarifying or amplifying information that was already analyzed in the EIR. There's no issue with that. I know that I'm making notes of all the additional comments that are being received here, as well as other staff in the City Attorney's Office, and we'll be gathering all these comments and providing responses to them. But for the purposes of providing some clarification and amplification here, that's perfectly okay.
And ultimately, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we come to you with the document to discuss the details of it for certification.
Because otherwise, this report would be ill-timed. It would be untimely. I mean, because to submit a report and be unable to talk about additional CO2 emissions just doesn't make sense. So
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Sinani, and a specific answer is we've talked about before. You have a Grayson that operates as inefficiently and as dirty as it does now will be replaced by a cleaner burning Grayson. On a megawatt to megawatt basis, you are producing less, but you're going to produce more megawatts. So the total will go up. We've never denied that because you're going to produce more megawatts at the facility. The locally generated facility goes into all of those savings I talked to you about before. But also keep in mind, this facility never goes anywhere unless the South Coast Air Quality Management District says yes. The keepers of the air quality in one of the strictest basins in the state and the strictest state in the nation is going to whether say yes or no as to whether we can build this, and that is specifically what they're going to look at. Now, when they look at it, they look at it from a basin-wide basis. Mm-hmm. So if there's an offset, they're looking at reducing the greenhouse gas in the entire basin, not just Glendale. So they take Grayson in consideration of the whole basin. And so if there's the ability...
I'm trying to concentrate on Grayson. So if I can bring you back...
But it is true. I'm sorry, Mr. Stein, but it is a fact that if there's reductions in another part of the basin, that helps with us at Grayson, even though we're bringing it up because we're producing more electricity at Grayson because it's a better, more
But those are all uncertains. What seems to be certain is that, and you're not denying it, is that there will be a net increase of 415 metric tons of CO2 if Grayson is repowered. So if I heard you correctly, old Grayson versus repowered Grayson, megawatt per megawatt, the emissions are much lower.
Correct.
However, I'm assuming because the new Grayson is going to be much bigger in terms of output of electricity.
It's going to produce more electricity, yes.
The total amount of emissions is going to be higher, as reflected in 415 tons. So how much more electricity is Grayson looking to produce compared to what it is doing now?
It's probably going to triple the amount that it does now. It is so low now. 2016, I think we were 18%. So, I was using that 600,000 megawatt number, which was about half. Mm-hmm. So it's probably somewhere between that, half, 50 to 60%. But at this point, we're only doing 18% of our total load. So we would increase that up to something more like half or a little bit more than half. So it's not 100% by any stretch, but we're so low now because of the plant's condition that it will go up, even though it's still only half of what we need on an annual basis.
Understanding that EIR number that's being discussed, I mean, that's effectively a snapshot based on this plant in the condition that it's in. If this were not even the optimal, but closer to optimal solution, as Steve points out, you'd be producing more locally as opposed to importing more locally.
So why are we looking to produce so much more and import less? I understand the self-reliance aspect of it, but apparently we've done pretty okay with even the 18% so far. If the net result of this is such a huge increase in CO2 emissions, why do we seem to be taking the responsibility of producing so much and then also producing so many emissions versus importing the electricity from another source, which may be cleaner?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Sinani, it's because our import capability is so very limited, and if we have to bring in renewables, which is what we want to do, we want to free up that amount and not buy fossil fuel from a local entity. Spot market purchases are very volatile. There's no guarantee on them, and we buy from a very small market. So our market where we purchase our energy has to be next to our transmission, and as you know, our transmission is limited. So we can't buy all over the country because we can't get the energy here. So for us to have the reliability of local generation, to free up the transmission, lower the cost, increase the reliability, decrease our reliance on other utilities, primarily LADWP, those are all benefits. Now again, because the plant hasn't operated, I'll give you an example. If it was operating in an equal capacity, the new plant would be significantly less, as Mr. Ochoa was alluding to, significantly less. It's the fact that the plant is in such bad shape that it isn't running as much. It pollutes at least double. At least double. This is, and I'm going by, I said Magnolia Power Plant in Burbank, that 2005, they reduced their emissions by almost half, but they had a plant that was running pretty comparable with what the new one was. They were pushing it hard. It wasn't as old as Grayson. But you're actually, if you looked at it again, that's why I use that megawatt to megawatt basis. And if we had the units up and running, we'd be running them. We would be running them in their current capacity. So,
just last question.
Yes, sir.
Are we looking to sell electricity? Is that part of this formula? Because
we had at one time, the question had been asked of me, is do you have the ability to sell power? Well, we do. The thought was that any of our SCAPA member agencies, and likely those that are right next to us, so LA or Burbank, if they were in a situation like we found ourselves in many times this year, last year and the year before, we could be able to sell them power if they needed it. We weren't looking to go out and become a merchant. We thought about it 2.5 years ago, but we haven't pursued anything since then. So the primary reason for the repower, the primary reason for all of the components of the facility are for the city of Glendale and the city of Glendale only.
Mr. Agajan.
I have a question. Megawatt per megawatt, new one will pollute less.
Correct.
But we need 250 megawatt of electricity, or we want to generate. We have to look at other alternatives too. I don't know why we are just concentrated on the issue of replacing old one with the new one. I do not see any study that what else we can do or what else we can use to have alternatives. Now is the time to look into it. The other problem I have is, thank you for extending the EIR period or comment period to November 20th. But what is this rush for? That I don't understand. Why we are rushing to this? What's the problem if we would have more time for the public to comment and we look into other alternatives?
Mr.
Why
Mayor,
we have to do it that fast?
So point of order, I have to leave if we're going to talk about this.
Sure.
So
All right.
I will leave. I'm not saying don't talk about it, but I have to leave if
Maybe this is not agendized, and
we have to be very careful about debating the point, again, by way of the EIR. So maybe as an encapsulation and a response to that, I would submit to you that the time frame in which to talk about Grayson and what we do, the alternatives, isn't today and surely isn't tomorrow. It was a couple years ago, and you did that by way of the integrated resource plan. You recalled the plan that came forward, different iterations, different configurations, different ideas about what to do with Grayson. Ultimately, what we've gone forward with, the limited notice to proceed that was granted by the council, was predicated on that IRP.
Correct.
And sorry, I don't understand that. I'm sorry, because 2 years ago I was here. I specifically remember what I have voted for and what I haven't voted for. I voted for those investments, those monies being forwarded towards a possible Glendale, Grayson repowering as a placeholder, as let's keep our options open. And that's how it's always been presented to us. Never at any point has this council committed to repowering Grayson.
That's
that was
correct.
never the case.
Can I interrupt? I'm sorry. First of all, that's absolutely correct. And that's not what Scott was saying. He was just saying that we had a discussion about whether to start looking at that process back a couple years ago when we started RP. It's absolutely within your purview whether to move forward with it. That's why we're doing the EIR.
And that's why you broke it into an LNP and a FNP.
There are multiple steps to this, and I just, again, and I intervened because the point here was to provide a, what do you call it, 20,000-foot level of our sustainability efforts, and put Grayson in the context of that, but not to have a discussion on the merits of Grayson, whether to do alternatives, when to do them, how to look at them, and Mr. Najarian and actually Councilmember Devine have conflicts with discussing the merits of Grayson right now, and so I appreciate, Mr. Mayor, your efforts to try to move forward on this item. I really do think we need to sort of press on from the item. I do apologize, but
Well, last comment, Mr. Mayor, but I have to second my colleague's comment on the extension, the comment period. I asked for the extension. I asked for 45 days. We got whatever, 30 years, whatever. But I don't understand why we can't extend it, but why we couldn't extend it. And the only reason I'm sort of saying this again is because the extension runs out on the 20th, I believe. This is a fundamental sort of big financial investment that the city of Glendale may or may not be making in its energy sector. So to rush it or to seem like we're somehow limiting the amount of discourse on this issue, it seems like we're stifling the discourse on this issue. I don't think it's healthy. So that, I'm done, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I got to wrap this up.
Just small. Dan brought up AESA. Thank you, Armenian Engineers and Scientists of America, which I have the honor to be their president. They can help too. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. What's next on the agenda?
Are we done with the brief?
Don't move. This is a.
Don't move the item.
Nothing file?
Yeah.
I'll move the item.
Okay. Thank you. What's next on the agenda? Adjournment?
Adjournment.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
We are adjourned. We'll wait for the room to clear, then